I'm Sarah Rees. I'm Head of Stakeholder Engagement at Lancaster University, and I have a particular focus on civic and community engagement. So I lead on the public and community engagement perspective of the Knowledge Exchange Framework, and also on our participation in the Civic Universities Network and on developing our civic approach. So what's distinctive, I think, about Lancaster University is that our commitment to being civic and to our communities has been within our university from its outset. It was in our original charter, as well as research and teaching, that we would make a difference through the example of our corporate life. And as we've gone through time, that may have waxed and waned. But over the last 3 or 4 years, particularly since we renewed that commitment in our strategies and appointed a Pro-Vice-Chancellor engagement, there's been a real acceleration in that commitment to the way in which the university can, through its civic engagement, through its public and community engagement, and through its research and teaching, actually work with our communities, with our businesses, with government, to actually really think about the needs of our area and how we can make a difference. We've still got a long way to go, but I'd like to think that the way we're doing it is quite distinctive and that we can make a real difference. What I wanted to cover today was a little bit how we approached the narrative, the sorts of evidence we looked for and how easy or hard it was to find that, and then also how undertaking the exercise has informed our next steps in developing our institutional approach to public and community engagement. I think the first thing to say, it was very much a team effort for all 3 of the narratives for the Knowledge Exchange Framework. So that team was our Pro-Vice-Chancellor Engagement, our Associate Dean for Enterprise and Engagement, the Associate Director for Enterprise and Innovation, and me. We had 3 narratives to do between us, so 3 of us took a lead on separate ones, and we developed those with input from a range of colleagues from across the institution. And then between us, we refined and reviewed the narrative in that core group. Then we took it for consultation to our engagement advisory group, and that's a formal advisory group of the university which reports to the Vice-Chancellor on our engagement strategy. And then when we were ready with a final draft, we shared that with a few members of our senior management team for comment before we then took it through our University Executive Board for approval. So in terms of the evidence and how easy or hard it was, there were 3 aspects that actually were quite straightforward, and I think that was reflected in our scoring. So those were the strategy aspect, activities, and the results sections. Strategically, we're well developed in terms of our approach to engagement and in terms of its inclusion in our institutional strategy. We've got governance processes around it. We've got senior leadership roles identified both centrally and in faculties and departments. We have a stakeholder-informed approach, and we've got a good record of success in major grant income related to engagement. But it was really clear to me that I couldn't score it as a 5 without having an actual public engagement or public community engagement strategy or plan in place. In terms of activities, there were so many to choose from. The challenge was what to put in and what to leave out. And so we aimed for a small representative sample of different types of activity and from different disciplines, and also that it was a geographical spread that reflected our local and global approach. For results, we looked for a range of qualitative and quantitative evidence, and we looked for different approaches to evaluation which reflected the activities which we'd highlighted elsewhere in the narrative. I think the most challenging areas for us were the support aspect and learning from results, and I think that reflects that learning and development mechanisms are relatively underdeveloped, and that we didn't have that strategy or implementation plan that we could refer back to assess progress and impact. So in terms of gathering evidence and approaching it, there were colleagues that we already knew in the organisation could help us with that. So obviously Research and Enterprise Services, the colleagues who gathered Table 5 data for the HE Business Community Interaction Survey. For me, it was really important that we reflected the cultural and artistic contribution that the university was making. So I approached colleagues in our Lancaster Arts and our Ruskin Museum to input there. And we reached out to colleagues who were doing particular types of public and community engagement across a different range. So, for example, we wanted to include an example of that very much directly engaging with the public to inspire them around research. And we had a really nice example of colleagues in physics who'd been to the Royal Society Summer Science Exhibition. So we looked at the ways in which they'd brought that to life, and then the evidence that they'd gathered as a consequence, and also some of the additional outcomes that came from that. We approached colleagues who were working actually with businesses placing students to understand if there were some examples of the ways in which students working with communities and the voluntary sector were creating different kinds of engagement and outcomes for those community organisations. We knew of a project of one of our health and medicine academics working in an A&E department looking at children's coming in for vaccines and the kinds of public health impact that the pandemic was having, and we thought that was a really nice example of the ways in which public and community engagement really help us understand some of the challenges that are in our communities and the ways in which the pandemic affected that. So we sought out those quite specific examples, as well as using some of the aggregate data from Table 5, for example, to show how we'd seen a growth in the kinds of events we were running and the kinds of the time that our academics were putting in, but we really wanted to exemplify that with the examples as well. Undertaking this exercise in and of itself, and also thinking about the fact that the public and community engagement perspective is seen as being an equal perspective in the knowledge exchange framework, and those two things together have really increased the visibility and recognition of public and community engagement within our institution. So public engagement is now explicitly mentioned in our new institutional strategy under our research pillar. We've renewed our commitment to civic and community engagement in our engagement pillar, and actually that's also reflected in our overall purpose and vision. It's also included in our new Higher Education Innovation Fund strategy and is embedded in a number of our knowledge exchange Concord priority actions. So it's really impacted already on how we're thinking about it strategically. I think secondly, the self-assessment exercise and actually the guidance that was provided on scoring, coupled with that link to the overall KEF results, helps us to provide a case for investment in public and community engagement. It helps us identify the key actions that we might want to take, and also shows us how taking those actions can help to impact on our scores over time, and of course, most importantly, actually develop and embed that culture to support public and community engagement in the institution. So some of the things we're planning to do, we want to establish a network and support the development and sharing of good practice. We want to proactively support academic colleagues to identify funding opportunities and develop really great applications relating to public engagement. We're reviewing and addressing training needs. We're improving and enriching the data collection and reporting around it. And also we want to provide advice and support on evaluation methods. And we want to use the EDGE tool, actually, to evaluate our current practice and support and gather feedback from a range of partners. I think the key thing for me in terms of creating the narrative and doing the self-assessment is give yourself enough time. It helped enormously for us that we participate in the pilot of the knowledge exchange framework. So we'd done a certain amount of work to identify the kinds of evidence we might be looking for and the ways in which we would bring that together. I'd suggest creating a timeline actually and thinking about who the key people are that you would want to feed into it and what your approval process is going to be to make sure you've got enough time to do that, but also give yourself enough time to create the narrative in a way that feels right for you and for your organisation. And as I say, I think probably consider what the thematic approach is that you want to take. I think it's a limited word count. We really struggled to fit our narrative in that, as I'm sure everyone else did. So there was a lot we had to lose. So I think deciding quite early on how you're going to theme that and prioritise it to make sure you can still keep some richness, demonstrate your evidence, but actually make sure that you've really got the information across that you want to include. Those are the things I'd probably recommend.